Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy.
This is episode number 108, How to Communicate Effectively About Sex.
Well, that sounds like something that is a valuable skill.
Yes.
So is this because some people have a hard time communicating about sex?
Yes, it can be a very difficult topic, and not because anyone's told us that it should be difficult, but I think one of the problems we face is that we aren't really ever taught how to have good discussions about sex once you're an adult and you're in that relationship. It seems like when we're taught about sex and we're taught about this part of our body and the reproductive system, it's just like, well, these are the facts about how your body works, but not, okay, what happens once you're in the sexual relationship and how you're experiencing it? How do you talk about that?
So when I say to you, bend over real quick, is that effective or not effective?
It is not effective.
Okay. Well, I say that because I think sometimes, from a man's point of view, again, back to the media and what the media teaches us about communicating about sex, I think we think that, we can just kind of say whatever we need to say, or else sometimes I think a lot of men actually also feel uncomfortable saying things because in a married situation, sometimes we're scared that we're going to sound dirty.
Yeah.
And even when we're trying not to sound dirty, I think we can sound dirty.
Yes.
And therefore, it's not really communication. We just kind of live with the way that we talk about things. And then I think over time, maybe we get more comfortable talking about it. But if we could learn how to communicate better from the beginning in a relationship, in a marriage, that'd be super helpful, because then you could really discover the things that both people like better than other things, and you get to that faster. But also, I think that as you learn how to communicate, you can really improve over time, rather than just, oh, well, this is what we do. And maybe you get used to saying certain things. Like, for example, like, what does a couple call an orgasm? Right? Because I know that in the world, you'd say something like, come. Or you would use other words, maybe some profanity to describe certain things. But if you're trying not to use profanity and you're trying not to use certain words, you might end up saying something that is a little bit, a little wonky.
Yeah.
And you might not communicate as well as you want to, but learning how to describe certain sexual acts together as a couple, whatever that means to you, right? We're not going to tell you what to say. You have to learn that on your own, like what words to use. But figuring out what words you both feel comfortable with, but also are maybe still sexy and not too scientific.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do I call your vagina the vagina every single time? Or is there another name that I can use that's not so scientific? Or same for the penis, right?
Right.
And some people are totally okay with using slang that might seem like profanity to some people, and it might not be profanity to them. So
Yes.
it's all in perspective too, right?
Yeah, 100%.
But really learning how to talk about it in a way that isn't a turnoff, and also that might be sexy, and also that will clearly communicate what you mean by that.
Yes. Well, and I think you bring up such a good point about like the vocabulary and the terms that we use. And so, yeah, like this podcast, we're not going to tell people specific terms to use, but we are going to give effective skills on how to communicate. But I think that what you're saying is so important, that this concept of like having the discussion with your spouse, like, hey, what are words that you would feel comfortable using? What vocabulary do you like using? I think is so valuable and could go a really long way, so that when you do try to communicate, there is more effectiveness there.
Yeah, it's just, so like you're having sex and, you want to ask your wife, like, So should I ejaculate inside of you or on your stomach, or, like, this is a little graphic, right? But like, I mean, it can get weird. I think even for married couples, it can get weird. And I think sometimes it sounds weird even coming out of our mouths.
Right. Well, and I think because of that weirdness, there can be a tendency to just stay silent
And not talk.
Yeah. And then that can end up causing way more damage if we're just becoming resentful, wishing we could have said things a little bit differently. So that's what today's episode is about, is how to communicate more effectively about a hard topic. So let's get into it. Okay. Number one, to start off with, whenever you're going to talk about any aspect of the sexual relationship, it's going to be very important to start with this concept in mind, and that is to use I statements. And we talk about this a lot, but this is going to be especially important because the tendency, the natural human way, is to start blaming.
Like, I love when you bend over real quick.
That is more effective than just saying bend over real quick. Yes.
So that's a step. Okay, so you guys know me if you've been listening to this podcast. I'm going to say things that are maybe a little bit outrageous, but these are very real things that men would think and maybe women would think too. But I'm going to say the stuff that maybe has crossed your mind, but you haven't said it out loud. So I'll be the one that does that.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah. And the important thing here is to make sure that when you are saying something, you want to have it come from your perspective and how you're viewing it. The thing we do not want to do is start blaming and giving commands, and because then what happens is that is no longer effective communication. Because when we say, like, you're never romantic,
Right.
Like if we were to say something like that in regards to our sexual relationship, I have just blocked all communication, because you're now going to be on the defense and you're going to want to defend all the ways that you are. But that was probably not even like what we really needed to talk about.
Or maybe I'm not even defensive, but now all of a sudden I'm really timid.
Yeah.
And worried that I'm going to offend you or something like that.
Yes.
Right? Like, get to the place where you can have like full on open conversation where you're not worried about offending. This is your spouse. You should be able to get to a place. Now, I'm not saying this is easy.
No.
But you should be able to get to a place where you can talk about whatever is on your mind without feeling like you're going to offend your spouse or, say something wrong where they're going to blame you for something. I mean, that's not up to you necessarily. You're going to say what you're going to say. But having a conversation where you know what the uncomfortable words are or the uncomfortable conversations are, and then you know what you need to talk about and discuss so that you can go forward feeling more comfortable talking about those things.
Yeah. And I'll just say from my perspective, I grew up as an only child. I never had to compete with siblings to get my point of view across or to say, well, I think something different. And so sometimes communication can be very challenging for me, or it has been in the past. I've really had to learn about communication, focus on communication, and work on it like with full intention and purpose. And so, I know that this is something that is not easy for everybody, because we do have that fear, I think, of offending our spouse, someone we love. We don't want to say something that might drive them away.
So I statements help.
I statements are big.
Okay, help us understand what I statements are.
So one example could be like, I really love it when, and then you fill in the blank, right? It could be like, I really love it when you put on music right before.
Well, I was going to say, wait, I wasn't sure what you were saying. I really love it when you fill in the blank.
Oh.
So from a man's point of view, I'm like, what? The blank, what's the blank?
That's right. You know what the blank is.
Sorry.
No, that's so funny. Or I really love it when there's a candle that's burning, during our lovemaking session. So being able to say, I really love something, or I really enjoy this. Think about right in the middle of sex. Let's say something's going really well and you're like, oh, that hasn't happened before, but I really like this. Mm-hmm. Being able to use an I statement, say, I really like that. I love what you're doing.
It's such that's an easy, benign thing to say. That's not, I don't think anyone's going to be offended by that.
Right. But can you imagine also if, let's say, something wasn't going so well in the middle of sex, and just be like, don't ever do that again. I can't stand what you're doing.
Yeah.
That could be a super negative experience.
Well, and it might be negative even if you say, I don't really like what you're doing right now. But again, we're adults and we should be able to have a conversation about that and not feel bad about it.
Yes.
Right? This is a lifelong process. This is a lifelong learning experience. You're two people, two bodies, two people that have tastes and desires, and those things change and evolve over time. So we should always be able to say that. And like, I want to know if I'm doing something that you don't like, right? So if you're at a place where your spouse says, I don't like that you're doing that, and you feel like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she said that. Like that's, maybe you have a deeper conversation about that. But being able to know what you like and what you don't like should be great news.
Right. And it reminds me of like parenting classes 101, right? When you're learning how to become a parent and you have a 3-year-old or a 2-year-old and they're doing all kinds of stuff, right, that you probably don't want them to do. A lot of parenting books will say, like, don't just say, don't do that.
Yeah.
They encourage you to actually say what you would like them to do so that they are not like oblivious and say, okay, well, I know I shouldn't do that, but now I still don't know what to do.
And also the why behind it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't like that so much. And we're going to get into other methods of having this communication and clarifying the communication. But then maybe also, I don't like when you do that because it's uncomfortable, or it makes me feel like I need to go pee, or it makes me feel pain. That's different than just don't ever do that again.
Yeah. Yeah. So true. So I think when it comes to this, if you're going to express something that is, that you would not want to have happen again, make sure to include the reasoning behind that. But if you want to express something that is going well and want to have more of that, then make sure to express that as well. So more of that comes back in.
And look, if this is new to you, or else if you're trying to new ways to communicate, this takes practice and you'll get more comfortable as you go forward.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing about marriage, is that you have experience after experience after experience after experience to be able to get better.
Yeah.
Right. What an awesome thing to have, one partner and to have that kind of marriage where you're getting closer and closer.
Yes. And I just want to bring up this point too, as we're talking about this. If you've entered into this type of relationship, you have already said, hey, I'm committed to you. And that also means this aspect of our relationship. And so I think that as we start to take a step in communicating this way, there is a real sense of authenticity. There's a realness. There is vulnerability. But there's also like what's at the base of intimacy, which is sharing and making some of these deep, sometimes difficult things known to one another.
Yeah.
And so even through the fumbles and through trying to communicate more effectively, you can also be developing better intimacy. And not just because you're talking about the physical and sexual part, but the emotional part during the process.
Well, that brings the emotional in when you have a communication that engenders trust.
Yeah.
And curiosity and care and selflessness.
Yes.
Right? That adds all that emotional side to it. Without that, it is just the physical, and that can easily go bad.
Yeah. So if communication has been a challenge for you, think about that this is a way for you to really be more authentic as yourself and being honest with that, but then also being real and genuine and authentic with your spouse. It's a beautiful goal to strive towards.
Excellent.
Okay, the next one, and we've talked about this before, so we're not going to spend a ton of time on this one, is called communicating on the scale.
I love it.
And that's just, you have a scale of 1 to 10, and you're going to communicate to your spouse where you are, at what number on the scale. 1 is usually not in the positive, right? It's more on the negative side. 10 is going to be, that's excellent, it's great. But you can also use this with like how much you enjoy something. You can use it as a way to express your comfort levels, right? So let's say you guys try a new position or something and you're like, oh shoot, that is super uncomfortable. That's like a 9 for uncomfortableness for me. Like, let's tone it down a bit, or let's make a slight adjustment to the left, like being able to communicate on the scale really allows for the wide breadth. Is that the right word?
Sure.
Of the experience, instead of just like right, wrong, yes, no, like, don't like.
Well, and the scale also allows you to not just be like, I don't like that.
Right.
Well, what about that don't you like?
Yeah.
Like on a scale of 1 to 10, I'm at like a 5. Let's try it a little bit differently so maybe I can get to a 6 or 7, or maybe it ends up being a 10.
Yes.
Right? So don't close the door on things if they're initially not a 10.
Right.
This allows you to say, okay, all right, so you don't like this. Okay, stop. What can I do differently that would raise your enjoyment of it? Because for me, that was like an 8.
Yeah.
Like for you, it's a 4. For me, it's an 8. And so I don't want to stop doing that.
Yeah.
But maybe I can get my wish and continue to be able to do that thing or have that or that position or whatever it is. But I don't want you to be at a 4 either.
Right.
I want you to be an 8 with me. So let's figure it out together and let's compromise and figure out how this can be something positive for both of us.
Yeah.
That's such an awesome way to do that. And for us, it's really helped that because we've been able to talk about things that maybe we are trying that's new, but it also puts me in a different position because really when it comes down to it, the discomfort is going to be almost always is going to be for the woman.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot less mechanics for the man that's going to say, oh, that really hurts.
Yeah.
Like, of course, there are positions that aren't comfortable for the man. Of course, that can happen, but more likely than not, it's going to be for the woman. So having the scale kind of communication gives me a lot more interest and a lot more empathy for you, where I know that instead of like, I'm going to try this and she's either going to like it or not, and then I'm going to get mad because it's something I really want to do.
Right.
Now all of a sudden I'm like, well, I really do care about you. Of course, we're all going to say we care, but come on, let's be real. There are things that we do to each other, even though we care about each other, that just make us mad. And sex can be one of those things if you don't know how to communicate it and you don't know how to compromise and you don't know how to talk about it so you can try to adjust rather than just stop.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. Some other things that you can use the scale for is like the speed at which things are going, right? So you can say, oh, this is great. You know, I'm at a 6. Let's take it up to a 7. I'm ready to go up to a 7, right? So you can use it with speed. You can also use it with how much pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, I'm handling that great. Let's bring it on. Let's go up a notch, right? Let's go up a level. And also like the direction of things, you know, there's a lot of mechanics to sex.
Or the depth.
Yeah. Yes. So the scale can be used for all of these areas. And so again, once you're able to use the scale, it kind of is like not offensive towards your spouse, right? Because it's just more about the experience. It's not saying you suck as a lover because I'm experiencing a 3, but it's more of the learning process together and saying like, yes, let's make a few adjustments and take it up a level.
It's like for me, you know, I think the discomfort for me is probably more on the tickling side. Like she does this thing with my nipples, you know?
I was like, what are you talking about?
You know, like there's certain things that, you know, over time, like I really like, but sometimes it's like, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, like that just tickles a little bit too much. If you just soften it up,
Yes.
it'll go from like a 3 to like a 9.
Yes.
Right? And
Right.
I mean, it goes vice versa, right? So there's pain, there's discomfort, there's also tickling, there's all these sensations. And things can turn from a 2 to an 8 just by talking about the mechanics and the subtleties of it.
Yeah.
And it's amazing what can happen. And again, when we're able to talk like that and I'm able to voice that, and then you can soften it up a little bit or maybe not tickle as much, then it's like, oh my gosh, that is the most amazing feeling. And that's awesome. But you're not doing anything different. You're just doing it in a different way.
Yes.
It's awesome. I love it.
It's so good. And again, these communication skills, the reason they're so effective is they leave blame out of the picture. Like the goal is not to offend our partner, our spouse. The goal is to just communicate effectively from our own experience. And using these tools totally helps with that.
Yeah, and I'll just say one more thing about it before you move on. But I think for both parties, talking like this increases trust, and it increases our love and our care and our fun in a way. Because look, if we couldn't communicate and all of a sudden, like, I'm not really liking what you're doing or not doing, and I'm like, okay, this just is the way that it is, and I have to live with it. Now all of a sudden, I'm like, my wife is a bad lover.
Yeah, that's true.
Right. And then you feel it from me, like, oh, he doesn't like this, or I'm doing something wrong, and then you feel bad. There's so many things that you can prevent in those subtle feelings just by learning how to talk.
Yeah. Our brains will take us down some pretty crazy rabbit holes if left unchecked. So that's why being able to communicate in these ways like really helps kind of lessen that significantly.
And, there's people who use safety words, right? Like,
Yeah.
there's safe words like, hey, whatever it is, abracadabra, that means stop.
Yeah.
Or whatever it is. That's not our safe word. I just made that up. But, have some fun with it too, right? Like, you can get silly with this. You can get silly with the way you talk about it. Like, have fun with it. But just get to a place, like, however you need to, so that you can get comfortable talking, whether it's before, during, or after. And look, there's also a lot of value in having kind of a recap. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, that was an amazing session we just had.
Yeah.
And these are the things I loved about it.
Yes, so true.
Right? So like why did you enjoy that so much that time?
Yes.
So for me to ask you that and you be able to tell me, and if like, that's such an awesome way to have more of those experiences.
Yes. Very true. Okay, we're going to talk about the last one, the third one. Okay, this is called the wishing window. And I really love this concept because I think a lot of times we want to express something, but we, again, feel some type of fear. Something's holding us back. We don't want to offend our spouse. And so we just kind of bury it and hold it back. So with this tool, it's going to give us the way to do that, to express the things that we haven't been expressing and know exactly how that's going to play out. And we can do it with confidence. Mm-hmm. So a wish is when we have a desire for something. And since we're going to talk about sex, it's going to be something that we desire in the sexual relationship.
Like a fantasy?
Well, it could be a fantasy. It could be romance. It could be any aspect of it. So I want to be clear that it doesn't have to be fantasy, what we're talking about right now. It could be any aspect of the sexual experience. And the thing about a wish is that it's often, when we think about it, it's unattainable, right? When we think about winning the lottery, our mind will go nuts thinking about, oh, if I won the lottery, then this and this. We think about all the benefits and how we would feel and how our life would be better.
Right.
So this is kind of like what wishing is like. And we all kind of have these wishes when it comes to how we wish our sexual experience would go. Part of having a wish is also expressing it. And I think this is something that we don't think about.
Right.
We just are thinking about wishes, or we think about wishes at birthday times when we are making a wish and blowing out the candle. But part of having a wish for this part of our relationship is being able to express it. So I think that's just key for us to think about.
Well, because I can think about a lot of wishes that I have that I might not feel even comfortable bringing up.
Totally. And so we're going to talk about this. This is exactly what we're going to talk about. So I want everyone to imagine that there's a window and that there's a windowsill. And whatever wish it is that you have, I want you to imagine that maybe you write it down and that you set it on this windowsill. So it's kind of out of your brain and it is now placed on this windowsill. So this is the way you are expressing it, right? You're kind of taking it from the inside and it's now going to come out. And so what we're going to do the reason we're going to do this is that we are going to kind of relieve ourselves personally from just carrying it around and just like thinking and thinking and thinking and allowing those things to just swirl in our brain. This could create a lot of anxiety, or it could...
And resentment.
Right? Because if we really want our spouse to do it and we're never expressing it, it could create a ton of resentment. So we're going to try to do this so that we can kind of release all of that. Now, the concept of putting it on the windowsill is to kind of release some of that negative emotion, but also the process of doing it, the process of laying it out there and expressing it is going to be like, hey, I'm going to express it for the benefit of expressing it, for the benefit of communicating. And that in and of itself is the goal, is to be able to express it without obligation
or expectation.
Okay. And that's going to be huge. So when you think about it, think about like, I can have the courage to express this because there is no expectation of it being fulfilled. In essence, it's that wish that is unattainable, right? So we're going to kind of lay it out on the line knowing it may never happen. And that's totally okay.
Okay.
So that's part of it. Okay. So as we consider laying out our expectation, how do we do this in a way that is effective with how we communicate? Why don't we just be super clear and transparent that we want to express a wish, right? I want to express a wish to you. I know it will probably never happen, but I just want to share it with you. Being able to say a sentence like that, it kind of sets up what you're about to do. And it shows that it's a wish. It shows that like, hey, I get that this might be out in left field. And I'm okay with that because my main goal is to just express it. It's to enhance the communication part of our relationship.
Which is huge as far as having the trust that you can at least express it. And I think I've shared before, there have been fantasies that I have that once I express them to you, some of them have been fulfilled and some of them have not been fulfilled.
Yeah.
But even telling you about those fantasies that haven't been fulfilled, they're not as much, I don't have as much of a desire for that anymore because I've gotten it off my chest.
Yes.
And just the fact that you've listened and haven't judged me has been huge. And that is a turn on in and of itself.
Yes. And I think this is so key. And I think that as you consider expressing your wishes to your spouse, that you're just so transparent and say, look, I want to share this with you. There's no expectation for you to fulfill it. I'm not expecting you to do anything with it.
But you can do something with it.
You can. But there's no expectation. And what this does is it allows the spouse to listen without already being on the defense.
Yes.
So listening skills have just skyrocketed.
Right.
And I think we sometimes don't understand the value of doing something like that, of how we phrase something so that our spouse who's on the listening end can listen effectively. Like this is a gift we give one another when we communicate effectively. So when we say, hey, I have this wish, I know it probably will never come true, but I just want to share it with you without any obligation. Like, I'm not going to expect you to fulfill it.
And then what that also, I think, allows you to do, let's say that I share something with you, it allows you to think about it and maybe think about it in your terms.
Yes.
Like, hey, you know what? I've thought about this and I think I can fulfill that wish, but here are my terms.
Yeah.
And these are the things I'm okay with about that. These are the things that I'm not okay with. And then you can talk about it more. What an awesome, really intimate conversation to have. And when we have done that, it really does bring us closer together, whether it's fulfilled or not. But because you care about me and because you care about my wishes, even if they might be like so dirty that you don't ever want to fulfill them, at least maybe you can think about ways that you could compromise. And that could turn into something totally different, but it still fulfills that need that I might have.
Yes.
Awesome stuff.
So when we place our wish kind of out there on the windowsill without terms, without obligations, or without expectations, there's a magical process that takes place that allows the spouse to kind of take a step back and say, okay, my spouse just laid out their wish, and it's there. It's in a safe spot with no obligation. No, now I can look at it objectively, right? I can look at it from a different angle. I can look at it at a different time in my life. I can look at it through different lenses, different lights. I can look at it, maybe today, I'm like, oh, no way. 3 years from now, I might be in a totally different place.
Right.
Our relationship might be in a different place where I was like, I remember that wish that I put, or that my husband put on that windowsill. And I haven't thought about it for a long time, but I kind of want to think about it now.
Just to clarify, are we actually putting these wishes on actual windowsills, or is that just a metaphor?
It's a metaphor.
Okay, I just want to make sure everyone's clear on that. Hey, and if you want to like have a windowsill for your wishes where we can like write something and put it on, that's fine. But
you could.
That's up to you.
Yeah, it's more of the concept, right? And we also have to remember that our marriage is going to go through good times, bad times. We're going to go through times where we have young kids, where maybe some wishes were like, that's not even on my radar.
Yeah.
But then, hey, our youngest kid is in kindergarten now, and that one wish you shared like 11 years ago, that is coming back to my mind, and I'm kind of interested in that one. Right. It allows us so much flexibility without that obligation. And I think that's huge. And this is the final thing I'll say on this one, is when our spouse shares a wish with us, I think it would be awesome if we could ask the question, like, what do you think you would feel if that happened?
Yeah.
Because that emotion is usually what we're seeking when we have wishes. And what we could do and keep in the back of our mind is if that's the emotion my spouse is seeking, there are lots of ways I can contribute to that emotion. That is very loving.
Right.
And a very wonderful way to communicate in other ways that also contribute to this emotion that could also maybe lead us to those types of experiences. So it's just a much broader way to think about it than maybe we had before.
So all of these things, we're not talking about, communicating in a way that you're just making your needs known and being bold. Well, be bold.
Right.
But we're talking about married couple working together to fulfill those feelings and those desires in a way that we are both happy about.
Yes.
Not just one of us. This is really selflessness and compromise, and also those needs that are very real coming true more than they would otherwise.
Yeah.
Because if you don't communicate about it and you don't have these skills, then those are just going to be dead dreams, and it's going to cause resentment, possibly, or probably.
And I think, let's say if you're the one who's like going to express a wish to your spouse, I think it's also good to ask yourself that question. Like, what emotion do I want to experience as a result if my spouse fulfilled it? And let that be a form of self-reflection to say, like, if I'm really seeking this one specific emotion, there are lots of ways that we can also contribute to our own experience of specific emotions.
This helps us take our thinking and our maybe just like base instincts to another level, because as a man, in the simplicity of, what gets me off and what doesn't, like from the basic, animalistic needs, as we've done this, my tastes have become a lot more refined, and my tastes have become a lot less selfish, and my enjoyment has gone way up, because now all of a sudden it's us together rather than just me. From let's just take something really, really fundamentally animalistic and basic, would be like pornography. Okay?
Right.
So if I'm thinking, I wish my wife was, kind of more like those women in porn. Okay, well, maybe I'm like wishing that. But if I can take a step back and use these skills and get to a place where I can share some of those things, however I can feel comfortable about it, and my wife and I are working toward that, well, maybe some of those needs will be met to some degree. But I'm going to realize and discover that those needs that I have and those wants that I have are not even related to pornography. and they're not what I thought they were.
Right.
They're actually a lot more, they're a lot higher level thinking and desires. And now all of a sudden, when we're both enjoying it, I'm realizing that I like this a lot more, and I may become totally disinterested in the pornographic, animalistic sex.
Right.
And I mean, for me, that's something that I think has been true.
Yeah. And I think I love when you pull up that experience that you've had, because I think it can be so easy for, I think, women to just be like men just want sex. They're never going to think about it differently. They just want to enjoy it this one way. But for you to say, this has been my experience, like, don't discount it, like, really consider what can happen when these types of skills are used and these types of discussions take place.
Yeah. And love gets deeper when we use these skills. And my blame lessens, my resentment lessens, right? This is my responsibility as your husband to think about these things in a way and work with you. And your responsibility to me is to do the same thing. And this is why marriage is so awesome, right? A lot of times we think, oh, marriage, and then we think about things in such a two-dimensional way and like, oh, it's so boring and, whatever. Like, no, marriage is the most incredible thing, and you will never have a sexual relationship with somebody that you're not married to, like you can have with your spouse in a married relationship.
Yes.
I know that's true.
You become a higher developed human.
Yeah.
As you go through these kinds of processes and these kinds of experiences together.
Okay. Well, I think that's it, right?
Yes. So this week, really take the time to think about the conversations you are having with your spouse about sex, and try to implement some of these skills and techniques so that you guys can become more closer and really be able to enhance this part of your relationship. Because remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and we hope you will join us again next week.
Bye.